Today on The Family Vacationer, we talk with Jennifer Allen, founder of the travel blog Wonders Within Reach. We're talking with Jennifer about accessible travel for families of children with disabilities. Episode 109 starts now.
Welcome to The Family Vacationer with Rob and Danny. The go-to podcast for families on the move.
Happy 2023, everyone, and welcome to episode 109 of The Family Vacationer. I'm Rob.
And I'm Danny, and guys, we're so glad you're with us, and we hope everyone is off to a fantastic new year. We're happy that you're spending this time with us, and you can interact with the show on Facebook and Instagram, and we're trying to figure out TikTok as well, so check us out there and watch the video version of the show on YouTube.
You know, we've talked many times about the stress involved in taking the family on vacation. One of the reasons that we go on vacation is to get out of the routines, right? That feel more like a rut, especially to us adults. But as we've established, disrupting that routine can bring its own share of issues, especially as it relates to our children. For families of children with special needs or disabilities, there's an added layer of potential issues that can make traveling seem daunting to the point where they ask, is it even worth it? But there are more and more resources for these families that can be of assistance and help you make those precious family memories that we're always talking about. Mm-hmm. And we really want to be a source of encouragement to you. One of the resources is a blog called Wonders Within Reach, and it's started by Jennifer Allen. Jennifer's a travel blogger that writes about accessible adventures for all types of families. She has 3 children, 2 kindergartners, 1 third grader. Her and her husband have shared their love of travel with their children. She says on her website that age and disability have changed the way they explore, but that her children make the journey that much more rewarding. What disability hasn't changed is the value to her children of learning other cultures, expanding their worldview, and learning through experience. Let's bring her on to talk about her family's journey. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. So, what I want to ask you first, Jennifer, what made you want to become an advocate for families that travel with children with special needs?
A bit of a convoluted story here. That sounds terrible. I'm going to start over right from the start.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Let's redo that one. I won't be like this the whole time. We'll get into a flow.
It's all right.
It's okay.
A bit of a long story. That's okay.
Sorry, and then I'll walk over you.
Oh, yeah, I'll just take it again. It's fine. So we are actually adoptive parents through China. When we picked up our son, we were not in the special needs adoption program, but when he was put into our arms, we realized that something was different with his body. We weren't really sure what was going on. So when we got home from China, we were able to get into the hospital and get a diagnosis, and we were told that our son would never walk. And I remember in that moment, it feels like a catastrophe when you find out that something that you had not expected for your child's life, it felt like a huge limitation. And I think that was a turning point for me when I started to see how we would be able to get back to life and realizing, this is not the end at all. It is a different path. It is not a bad path. It is not a lesser path. It is a different path. And there was that adjustment phase for myself as a parent. And I see a lot of other parents who maybe get stuck in that phase, and it's hard for people to get out. So when I actually started Wonders Within Reach, that wasn't even in my mind, and I'm not sure why. My original intent actually was just for families, showing them what it looks like to travel once you've settled down, you have 2 jobs, you've got kids that are in school, and navigating kind of the schedule. Because, a lot of parents kind of push travel to the back burner once they have families.
Yeah, for sure.
So I started this Instagram account and this blog on a random whim. I mean, I had never even been on Instagram, and it was, I got this big idea, and the next day started both. About 3 days into it, saw that there are families on Instagram that are showing what it looks like to travel with more of a rooted lifestyle. But I didn't see any families that looked like ours. And so there was a natural shift in that I saw there's a need here, because we don't see other kids with wheelchairs, not just on Instagram or when we're traveling. We don't see kids in wheelchairs anywhere other than when we're at the hospital. And when we do interact with those families, there are those conversations of it's just too hard. It's too hard to get out. And so they're not doing a lot of things. And I mean, even here, as we're getting more like all abilities playgrounds and things like that, it's difficult, I think, for families to start making that transition to going out, because there are so many little obstacles. So yes, it started with that shift in realizing, okay, this is not the end, and people need to know that. And so then through Wonders Within Reach, being able to share that.
That's awesome. So I'm sure you're just a wealth of knowledge now at this point, but in your experience, what are some of the major fears and hurdles that most families have when they're considering traveling with a child with some form of a disability?
So the first one that's obvious that comes to mind is accessibility. You look at going anywhere, there are obstacles. I mean, even in the States, we have a lot of older buildings and, everyone is grandfathered into ADA. So if you get to a place that has steps to enter, you can't go in. If you're able to get into a place, they're not necessarily set up for wheelchair users. And so you're not able to use the services that are there once you arrive. So that's kind of the big one that I think people have in their mind. That was certainly mine when I heard that our child wouldn't walk, thinking about not just structures, but even the world. I mean, you can't go hiking. Trails aren't made for wheelchair users. They're not designed with wheels in mind. Secondary to that, there are a lot of things for most people who are disabled. There's more than one thing going on. And so while we see a wheelchair user or somebody with a crutch or someone with visual impairment, a lot of times there are other medical needs that go with that. And really the physical limitation is just, it's the tip of the iceberg. And so things like handicap restrooms or a place to change someone who is not a baby. We're in that place now where it's really difficult because we have incontinence needs and he can't fit on a tiny changing table when he's going on 7 years old. So little things like that. But both of those actually, I would say, would be below attitude and perspective. Going back to my original perspective of this is the end of the world. I think that it's often presented that way. I mean, I think about even doctors and the prenatal experience and the way that the news is delivered. And here's what your child's quality of life is going to be. And while those things aren't untrue, I think there's a lack of balance where I didn't have, like what I'm sharing now, showing how we're out and we're seeing the world and we're doing things. I didn't have that knowledge of other families doing that. I didn't have in my mind when I got this diagnosis of, okay, he's not going to walk, he's going to be a wheelchair user. I wasn't thinking of all of the quadriplegic athletes and all of these successful careers that other wheelchair users have. That wasn't the first thing that came to mind. So I think that's actually become part of this too, in just raising that awareness, showing that this is what it looks like to get out. But there is that mindset of, okay, well, what can we do? Now we have a wheelchair. And I think that's actually the biggest hurdle is kind of identifying what you're afraid of with a wheelchair. In my own journey, after I got over that initial shock of, oh, okay, this is what our life is going to look like. It was kind of figuring out, well, why am I so scared to go out? Why do I think that our world is over? And so taking it kind of one task or trip at a time to see, okay, how do we move on to the next step? And so for us as a family, like hiking is a big deal for us. And so that was kind of my first step. Okay, how do we hike with a kid in a wheelchair? And for some reason, I had no idea. And it seems silly in retrospect, but there's not that awareness, right? We don't encounter people in wheelchairs on the trail, and so we don't know. So I started researching how to hike with a wheelchair. And
it's out there.
It's I know everything is out there, but it seemed to me at first like a silly Google search, like, well, why am I even looking? Is this something we can do? Well, guess what? It is, and it's not that hard.
Oh, wow.
And then you feel silly for not looking it up beforehand. Like, why did I wait so long to look at it?
Definitely.
You didn't think it would be there.
With a lot of our travel things, I think there are a lot of things. Now I swing on a pendulum of, oh, the world is totally accessible. We can do anything we want to. And then I have an awful experience and go to the other end of, there's nothing we can do.
Oh.
Yeah, but with that, so we found an all-terrain wagon. We just had wheels that could go on pretty much any kind of trail. I mean, we were going over tree stumps and rock stairs and whatever. We just needed the right wheels to do it. And so that was a first step for me. But again, it's in that changing attitude and perspective. I know I kind of took that answer a lot of ways. So the accessibility as obstacles, and then bathroom needs and other medical needs when you're thinking about medical routines. But the biggest one I still think is just changing your perspective and realizing that, yes, it's going to look different, but there is a way that we can get this done.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think you addressed my next question about how your family addresses those hurdles. But, from you talked about research. Are more destinations, giving that kind of information now, like as far as accessibility?
There is definitely a big transition that is taking place. It is a slow and steady process.
Right.
I read an article the other day that New York City plans to be fully wheelchair accessible by 2050. So,
Wow. Okay.
right.
Well, that's
So we're
good,
getting
but
there, but
Yeah.
I know, but 2050,
I
yeah,
know.
that's a ways out still.
Why that long? That's what I'm wondering.
they have a lot. So this actually kind of blows my mind because New York City, you think very modern, uh,
Hmm.
influential, should be on top of things,
Yeah.
but they're actually one of the hardest cities that we've had to navigate.
Mm.
The metro,
Gosh.
there, when we last visited, I think it was 60 some of their subway stations are wheelchair accessible, which sounds like maybe a lot until you think about how many stops there are in New York
Yeah.
City.
Yeah.
I'm
Way more than
surprised it's
60.
not 100%.
I
Wow.
know.
Yeah. So that's what they're working toward. But there's a lot of work to be done when you think of all the stops that aren't. Obviously, there's a lot of infrastructure there.
Mhm.
So yes, as you talk about, do a lot of websites have information? I have no idea how to ballpark a percentage,
Sure.
but I will tell you that whenever we're planning a trip, there are many places that still don't have information.
Mm.
So that is actually the one thing that I would say is the first step, and that is there's just an extra layer of planning. So
Mhm.
I always go to a website and start with the plan your visit tab and see if they have anything on wheelchair accessibility.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then it's a phone call of what can we do here, or an email if they have an email address. But often those info emails nobody ever responds to,
Right. Right.
Fine.
which I actually, using the phone is such an old fashioned technique. Who does that anymore? But we find we have to call a lot of places. So the first one is planning. And then the
Yeah.
second one I would say is flexibility, because even if you call someone and they tell you that they are accessible, some people don't know what that means. And I've gotten better with specific questions to
Mm.
find out if they actually have what we need, which I think is wise for anyone with a disability anyhow, because accessible doesn't mean the same thing to everyone.
Right.
But I remember there was a bookstore that I loved when we were newlyweds. We would visit, but hadn't been in it since having a child in a wheelchair. And so, you don't see those things until you need to see them. So I couldn't remember if it was accessible or not.
Mhm.
And I had called, and the woman who answered the phone said, "Oh, of course we're wheelchair accessible." And so then I started asking specific questions because I remembered they had a second floor. Is there an elevator to upstairs? Oh, no, there's
Oh
not. So
no.
I guess just the first floor is accessible.
Oh
And
my
there's a
God.
coffee
Oh,
shop there.
you meant
So I
that
asked,
accessible. Oh, okay.
right. So I
God.
asked with the coffee shop, can we get into the coffee shop from the bookstore? Yeah, there's a single step, but she thinks it's small enough that we would be able to get a wheelchair over it. Okay, good. Are there any other barriers or steps that I should be aware of that we're not thinking about? There are steps to get into the building. Yeah, we have 4 steps to get in. Oh, we're not accessible, are we? No, you're not.
Jeez.
Well, is there a ramp? Then no.
Nope. Just
Oh my
stairs,
goodness.
4 of them. So it's not like one little step that maybe you can, tip up or finagle. No, 4
Mm.
stairs. So, right. People don't always know what to look for. So yes, both the planning and the flexibility. The other example in flexibility is things change. So we had, actually, this was a hosted visit where we were going somewhere to do a review for them. And we
Oh
got there and
no.
the elevator was broken.
Oh
Oh.
my
And it's
gosh.
right. It's a 4-story children's museum. Yeah, it was a long day.
Yeah.
You'd think somebody might put 2 and 2 together. We're having somebody come to talk about our destination
Yes.
here. You'd think they'd get that going, but I guess not.
And things happen, obviously.
Yeah.
Elevators
Yeah.
Sure.
break. But first of all, it should be updated on the website, because if people are looking, then at least there's something that says, oh, by the way, we're not accessible for today, tomorrow, whatever, however long it takes.
No.
And I think in prioritizing too, people don't think about that. Like, oh, it's just an elevator. Kids can walk
Yeah.
for a couple days. Well, not all of them can, actually.
Right.
No.
Well, you mentioned that emotional journey that you went through from this is the end of the world to understanding that it's gonna be a different journey. Like, how long did that take, and how did you work through that?
So we have a friend whose father actually is a quadriplegic and is an athletic competitor in many areas. Actually, I'm trying to remember what his main thing is. I think it's Taekwondo. It's some kind of martial arts.
Oh,
I don't remember which
wow.
it is. Right. And she actually was staying with us when I got the diagnosis. She actually had my other kids in the waiting room. And so it is that awareness piece. And I think that was huge. So she called her dad while she was with me. She's Colombian, so their conversation was in Spanish. But every once in a while, she'd give me tidbits. My dad says this. My dad says that. And it really is knowing that there's the other side of the story.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a godsend that she was there, because it really was the perfect person for when I received that news to have, hold on, it's not what you think it is. And it's
Right.
not like it was an instant, oh, okay, everything is okay. But it was oh, okay, we can step back and we can look at this. It's going to be different, right? But it's not the end. And I mean, I know her dad through her. I don't know him well, but I mean, I know that he is happy and that he is successful and is living the life in a wheelchair. And so
Yeah.
it is that awareness piece, which Wonders Within Reach has kind of come to double for that. So the blog is really a travel resource for special needs families that gives them accessibility information on destinations. And Instagram has really kind of turned into focusing on that awareness piece, because it's huge and it's missing.
Right.
Yeah.
What about equipment? Do you guys, when you fly, do you travel with your own wheelchair? Do you rent equipment in other cities? How do you do that?
So because we're pediatric, I have not found anywhere that we can rent,
Okay.
which does
Wow.
add a little, yeah.
Wow.
It's another one of those things. I mean, we could rent an adult sized wheelchair and push him everywhere, but then there's that independence piece. I know
Yeah.
you're both parents, and I'm sure you remember the elementary ages and fighting to do everything on your coat. The kid won't let me, or are on their own. That's the same. My kid won't let me zipper his coat for him. So to push his wheelchair, I think it would be endless meltdowns.
Right. It'd be offensive, right? He wants to do it
That's right.
himself.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. So we use our own everything everywhere we go, which means a larger vehicle because we have to carry the wheelchair around. And I don't know if it's just our pediatric wheelchair or pediatric wheelchairs in general, but it doesn't fold or compact in any way. The whole chair has to go into the van.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
How does that work with airlines? Is that an
That's my
issue with
question.
any airlines?
For all of our travel, then we have to check it. So it goes under the plane. I
Okay.
have heard that recently some airlines are starting to progress in allowing wheelchair users to keep their wheelchair on the plane, so that when it's time to disembark, oh, hey, they have a chair and they don't actually have to wait for everybody to be off the plane and for them to start getting luggage from out from under it before they can bring the chair up. Which is also huge for protecting your chair, because I'm sure you've heard the nightmare stories of chairs that are broken and damaged. And in our situation, I'm sure we'd figure something out, rent something, and we would be pushing him in a wheelchair. But I always think of solo travelers. And if you're a wheelchair user and your wheelchair's gone, I mean, your legs are gone. You're stuck
Right.
there in the airport.
Yeah.
There's nothing that you can do. There's nowhere that you can go. Thankfully, we have not had that situation. But yes, we travel with all of our own things, mainly because of size. It needs to be specific to his needs.
Yeah.
I didn't think about this, and I guess this shows how unaware. I didn't think about the fact you'd have to wait for them to get to your wheelchair under the plane before you could even deplane. That must
Well, and
that must be
even
a little
in getting through the aisle. So for us, Jaden can do some walking. He has orthotics that keep his legs in place so that he's able to do short distances. So he can walk to the door of the plane so that he can get to his wheelchair, and that's fine. But a lot of people cannot. So they have a super skinny wheelchair. I don't know if you've seen those, that fits in between the aisle seats. So they often carry the wheelchair user up into a plane. I mean, if you're doing one of the tarmac entrances where you have to go up the steps, they're carrying these people in these skinny wheelchairs, right? So that they can put them on the plane and then push them through their seat. But because of that, then they also have to wait until everyone is off the plane before they can get that wheelchair back in to get the wheelchair user in the seat and back off the plane.
So don't fly if you're in a hurry, basically.
Oh, no.
I mean, really, you're kind of at their mercy.
Well, and I had talked about bathroom needs as being a secondary thing. There are not accessible bathrooms on planes.
Right.
So
wow.
Good luck with those long haul flights.
Yeah. Have you ever missed a connecting flight? I'm just thinking about like how that would work.
We have, but nothing catastrophic.
Okay.
So we had, I mean, this summer, what, 50% of connecting flights have been canceled or something horrific like that.
Right.
So I think it was just a matter of time before something somewhere, but it all worked out okay. So
That's good.
yes, we did get the chair. There were no issues there. We did
I
have,
mean, air travel's not fun for anybody, but when you
yeah,
add this to it, I'm sure it does add to your planning stage in your day for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
We had a flight where they had kept it with the luggage. So when we got off the plane, they said, "Well, we don't have your wheelchair. It was checked with the luggage, so you have to pick it up at the wait at the luggage pickup." Okay, how do we get there? So, do you need a wheelchair? Well, yeah, we need a wheelchair.
I'm
Good grief.
Dude,
I don't know.
wow.
Right. I don't pack this just for fun.
Yeah. No, we'll
Oh
just
my
leave it
goodness.
here.
Right. So then we waited until someone could go and find wherever they store the wheelchairs at the airport and bring us one. And half an hour later, then we were on our way.
Right, right.
Goodness.
Well, so looking back at all of your experiences, what do you see as the value of travel for children? Like what makes it all worth it?
Twofold. I think of traveling myself when I was younger.
Mhm.
I was actually homeschooled, and my parents were ahead of the trend.
Right on. Yeah.
I was homeschooled before it was a thing. But I remember our U.S. history. We did U.S. history. We took off around the states, and we were
Oh,
able
man.
to experience. Right. And
So cool.
my mom, gave me my huge portfolios of essays and things from high school. And now, as an English teacher, I look back like, oh, I learned this topic so much better than anybody else.
For
Yeah,
real.
right.
Yeah.
Because there's something that you definitely gain through experience that you don't gain in a textbook.
Mhm.
Uh, Next experience, I was able to serve in Mexico City also when I was in high school. And I'm sure if you've gone anywhere, developing nation, I mean, you see the world in a different way.
Mhm.
And there's a healthy perspective that is gained when you see people who are different from you. I think it changes your overall attitude and outlook on life when you realize, oh, I have it really good.
Right.
Really, there's a shift in just seeing that our lives are not the same as everyone else's. Um, so I'm a big believer in the more we connect with other places and other people, the more that we understand the world that we live in,
Yeah.
the more that we have a heart for justice and for equality. My platform is for accessibility and inclusion. And I learned that because of having someone in my family with a disability who needs that. And I think in any social justice issue, we have that heart for justice because of people. It's not
Absolutely.
it's not usually
Yeah.
the cause. It's because we've seen it. And so I
Yes.
think any of these issues are okay, yeah, well, our world is struggling with this, whatever, a lot of things. But when you see it, like, oh, right, this matters. These are real people who are being affected. And
That's
so
right.
I think that's my biggest thing with my kids is I want them to experience the world so that they experience people. I think that is huge in combating prejudice and laying that foundation for any sort of inclusion and equality because they know better. I mean, they're
Right.
seeing these people who are impacted, and so hopefully it becomes a heart issue for them.
Yes.
And also just going back to the general learning experience, I think that you just gain so much from different cultures and experiencing different things than what you're used to.
Yeah. I took my oldest daughter when she was 10. I took her with me to Bolivia. And I'm telling you, just her being able to see what some people have to live in their conditions.
Yeah.
And it makes you understand why people want to do what they do. People, I don't want to get political, people argue about immigration and all those kinds of things. And you look at and you understand why people want to come here, or they want to do everything they can to improve their family situation. And it really does, like you said, it's a heart issue. You see what people deal with and you develop a heart for people, not politics or anything else. You just develop a heart for people.
Yeah.
I think anything that we can do to increase empathy and understanding is totally worth it for sure.
It is, absolutely.
What would
Yeah.
you say to those families that maybe they've had a recent diagnosis and they're kind of in that first stage that you're talking about? We mentioned the things that make it worth it to you, but to those folks that say, "Oh, I just don't know that we can," what would you say?
Take a deep breath. I think it starts there.
Right.
It sounds basic, but I wish that's what someone had said to me. Slow down and breathe.
You're right.
There is an analogy that I like. I don't remember who the author is right now, but I think it's called Welcome to Holland. And it talks about you're planning a trip to Italy, I think is the example. And you're, planning to see the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And you've got this trip through Venice and it's all mapped out. And your flight somehow gets switched and you land in Holland. And you realize this is not what I expected. This is not what I planned for. This and this. I learned the language. I was ready for this. Whatever. I converted my money, anything. And you were excited for this portion. And then it's not that. It doesn't mean that Holland is bad. Holland is
Right.
gorgeous. It's a
beautiful.
fantastic
Yeah.
place to visit. Right. And so it's just that shift of this isn't what I expected. It's different. It doesn't mean it's less. It's different. And in fact, it could be better if you can get your mind into a place where you're shifting and realizing, oh, this is a really great thing that I've been given. Let's see what we can do with this.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk places that your family has been. What are some of your favorite family travel destinations?
This question makes me laugh, and it's very different for each member of our family.
Yeah.
For sure.
So this summer, we did 5 countries in Europe, which was fantastic. The summer before, we were in California and did Yosemite and San Francisco and a bunch of things. And if you ask my middle son what his favorite places that we've ever gone, he will say Altoona, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you've ever heard of Altoona. Probably not.
So. I don't think so.
It's not a city. It's not a tourist attraction. But they had a fantastic for the entire family. He was able. I don't know if you're aware of the Sheetz versus Wawa competition that we have here on the East Coast, but it is the location of the first Sheetz. It's a gas station chain that has like fast food made to order.
Okay, now see, I've heard of Wawa and I've heard
Yeah.
of Buc-ee's, but I've not heard of that one.
No.
Yeah, so the East Coast it's split by Sheetz and Wawa, and originally there was like a territorial border, but I've heard that was infringed upon, and now they're both building wherever. So maybe it will come your way. I don't know, but I mean, it's a gas station with fast food quality food. But they had fried mac and cheese bites, and that was their dinner. So it was the life.
So do a podcast on Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
Altoona.
Altoona.
Okay.
Altoona. It is one of their favorite destinations. Paris was the favorite for my oldest son because that was a bucket list destination. If you can have a bucket list when you're 10, he does. So I really enjoyed Austria because it's pretty everywhere. You don't have to do anything or go anywhere. We were taking the train in from, where were we coming from? Somewhere south. We were coming from Hungary, so down and over. But the ride, we don't need to go anywhere. We don't need to see anything. I'm just riding the train into Austria. Sheesh, it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I enjoyed that for that. In travel suggestions, when we started traveling with a wheelchair, we started simple and kind of worked our way up. And so at this point, I think I'm a little bit more aggressive in what I'm willing to try and take on because I think we can figure it out and find a way and get it done. But we started Disney World was our first trip as a family because they have a great reputation for welcoming everyone and finding a way to make it work. So that was our first trip. And it was kind of back to the deep breath. It was an easy thing to do as a family and it was good. And so it was that little bit of confidence of, okay, we can get out. We can do long car trips. We can fly. We can do these things. So let's see what we can do next. And our next thing after that was Niagara Falls, which I had no idea how accessible it would or would not be. I think of when you look at like the Cave of the Winds tour and all the little stairs that go down. Did you know they also have an elevator that drops you to the bottom? Fun fact.
Ooh, I did not know
Yes.
that.
No.
Because
Good to know.
need to, right? But now you know. So we started, with easier things and have kind of worked our way up to see, okay, well, what can we do here? What can't we do here?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm going to ask you another question, but as a language geek, I have to ask you. You mentioned Mexico City. Do you speak Spanish?
Not anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
How terrible is that? I spoke decently in high
yeah.
school and enough to get us through when we were there. Uh, no, we
Okay.
communicate. Actually, we have basic Spanish that we communicate with each other, my husband and I, so that our kids don't know what we're talking. So, like, if we want to
Oh,
go out for
Oh,
pizza or
nice.
something, we have enough.
Nice.
So, our friend who's Colombian says we speak like kindergartners. Like, we
right,
have
right.
a basic vocabulary. We would sound hilarious in trying to speak with a regular speaker, but
Okay. Well, that's the language teacher in me. I just had to ask. So sideline. But
yeah.
okay, so I want to talk about Wonders Within Reach. Now, your blog offers so many resources for families. So, what are the ways that families can engage with you online?
So for families who are looking to travel with a disability, the blog really is the best place to go. Destinations that are already mapped and for things or disability travel bloggers.
Mhm.
There aren't any other, and so it's a little bit different. So you think of there are other disability travel bloggers, but they're adults usually traveling solo. Some of them do have families, but it's often that adult focus. And so it's just a slightly different direction. But that's always where I start, is looking for a blog for traveling anyhow, because if somebody's gone before, they can tell you what you can and cannot do. And it's wonderful.
Yes,
Right.
So that's a lot of what I have is destinations that we visited, and then building itineraries of these are things that you can do. And if you've Googled best of Philadelphia or whatever city, and you find a different list than what I have, well, it's because the things that I didn't include aren't accessible.
Oh,
And sometimes that is clear. Well, I'll say, this is not something you can do. This is not something you can do. This is not something you can do. And that's actually a perk of when we are doing more of our own travels. Often when we're hosted, they're saying, can you highlight these things that are accessible?
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
but
Yeah.
can I also warn people about the things that are not?
Yeah.
Mm.
So
Seriously.
sometimes it's more obvious in the article than others, but it's always there so that you know what you can and cannot do.
Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, when you're being hosted, how much do you have to stay in that straight line and talk about the good things versus some of the other things that might,
I am
be less than flattering, I guess.
I am upfront when we are taking a job, but that we are also reviewing because it's what our audience needs.
Right.
And so, I mean, I would never, I don't know, negatively attack someone, I guess.
Mhm.
But they know when they're getting us that this is also part of it. And it is interesting in seeing different destinations and their response to that. Some
Right.
are excited about it and want the feedback. And that is beautiful. And that even when I'm writing my review and saying, okay, well, this wasn't accessible, but they're working on it, or they plan to add a ramp to this building in 2023, or they plan to add an ADA room in this time frame. And we have had a lot of things like that where as we're visiting and making suggestions, they say, oh, well, we can do that. And so then I can include, this is coming soon. So while this wasn't accessible, it will be by the time you visit.
Yeah, it really is a great opportunity for them to learn from you as far as, what needs they can address.
Yes.
Yes.
And I mean, that just depends on where people are, I guess, in their business mindset. We either are met with enthusiasm of this is something that we can do and we can welcome more of the population, because I mean, from the business mindset, 15 to 20% of the population, depending on how you count numbers, are disabled. And I'm working with Travelability right now, who's focusing on the baby boomers who are aging and will be disabled. And did you know 70% of our population is baby boomers? I just Googled that today because after having a conversation with them, right, thinking about what kind of accessibility needs are we talking about needing in the near future?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did
And it
not know
could be
that.
a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, that's wow.
I
Well, so
know.
you would think these places would invite you all over just so you could,
Yeah.
let them know, give them feedback, like you said. Wow.
But right, it goes back to mindset, perspective. Some places are excited, other places my worst response I ever received was, can you tell me how much it's going to cost and where we'll get the money?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I can tell you how much money you might lose if you don't do this.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I didn't even have anything to say after that, because I felt like even if I were to research grant money for her, I don't think she would have done it, because
Yeah.
it seemed like she was not interested in investing in it, whether it was time wise or money. And so it was okay. This is
Yeah.
just not going to be a thing we can do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you'd think they'd look at it as an opportunity instead of a hassle, but I guess, it is a matter of mindset and how they want to approach things.
Mhm.
And people see it as, okay, we're doing this for 20% of the population. They don't see it as, this is something that everyone can use and is good for all people, which is always the case with accessibility. You look at curb cuts and people think, well, those are for wheelchair users. When you cross the street, you probably use the curb cut, right? Because
for sure.
it's easier with your rolling suitcase, with your stroller, with your kids who can't take big steps, with most people, with the elderly, they're just easier in general. Closed captions on television. So it's an easier thing when you're in a loud place that you can watch it as well as listen to it. There are just so many things that are done because of accessibility and inclusion, but they're not hurting anyone. They're good for all of us.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where unless it affects you, you might not think of it. Like my mother is essentially deaf, and things I never thought about until she started having hearing problems. Yeah. Now they're like crystal clear, like, well, why doesn't somebody think of that and do that? Well, because it doesn't affect them. That's a shame.
And it's not necessarily their fault if it hasn't been brought to their attention, right? Because you weren't thinking about it before she started struggling. I wasn't thinking about ramps in places before I had someone in a wheelchair. We don't know better until we see it or are impacted by it. And so I guess that's also where the awareness piece comes in, is I want people to see this before they're impacted by it.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, make sure and check out more from Jennifer at wonderswithinreach.com. Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and coming on the show.
It's been amazing.
Thanks for having me and for sharing. I appreciate it.
Hey everyone, if you're ready to plan your next family vacation, call my dad. He would love to help you as a certified travel agent. He never charges a fee to help you plan your vacation. Email him at rjones@starstufftravel.com. Get started planning your vacation today.
Well, that does it for this week's show, and what a great way to kick off 2023. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Till next time.
Thank you for listening to The Family Vacationer. Make sure and subscribe to hear more of Rob and Danny.